Moving on to round 15. Tyler Higbee, Raheem Mostert, Van Jefferson, Marvin Jones, Tyrion Davis-Price, J.D. McKissick, Mac Jones, Noah Fant, Hayden Hurst, Sammy Watkins, Evan Ingram, Paris Campbell. Some fun players in here. You could see the 6 players with a positive advance rate in here. So it was quite hard to consistently miss on players in this round. And there were even a few who were giving you positive fantasy points over expected per game, which anytime that I see positive fantasy points over expected per game on a per game basis, it just feels like that's a player who's been relevant and had a lot of good times. Raheem Mostert is somebody who I felt like had a good season this year, 9.7 points per game, which isn't outstanding, but for where you were getting him and the type of builds you were building around, it kind of was enough sometimes. He had 5 touchdowns and 5 top 15 performances. We talked about following the money earlier on, but Chase Edmonds was not the pick that you wanted in this Dolphins backfield.
I will tell you this as a Dolphins fan. We have we try to find Ricky Williams every year. We've done this. I'm serious. There's a list of these guys. Frank Gore, Lamar Miller. Well, Lamar Miller was drafted, but look at like Frank Gore, Arian Foster, Noshawn Moreno, Chase Edmonds, Raheem Mostert, Jordan Howard, Malcolm Brown. Like the list literally goes on and on. And if you're time that someone signs a Dolphins a running back, I'm just like I don't expect it. But I will always try to take a shot on the second guy. The second guy always kind of works out. Malcolm Brown was kind of goofy, but like Raheem Mostert's a guy that I think that I believe that he would have been more relevant because the scheme made more sense to him. I thought he was just a better back than Edmonds. I didn't think Edmonds showed anything in Arizona, and us signing him was just funny. I think it was just meant to show that Kyle Shanahan could have been a smarter guy. Like, I can make any. Sorry, Kyle Shanahan, but I can make any of these guys work, right? I think he was a great pick. Raheem Mostert is probably the guy that you wanted, obviously, along with Jeff Wilson in the future. But I think coming to the season, coming from his ADP, given that Chase Edmonds hasn't finished seasons, if you didn't believe in his talent, I think you take Raheem Mostert because even if he only gave you 10 games this year and he only gave you 5 good ones, great. You're paying for this at round 15. That's the steal. Front 5 or back 5, it doesn't matter. It's contribution games, and I love it. So I think that Raheem Mostert is obviously a great pick here. And I would look forward to him next year if we kept him re-signed, but I hope that his ADP still stays low. Hoping that the age part factors into it.
This is the kind of archetype of a player that if you're building a 0 RB team, you want players like this who are going to give you those usable weeks whilst you wait for the injuries to pile up and some of your other dart throws to really turn into every down players. In the last round, we kind of talked about a whole host of tight ends. And again, there was a bunch of them here. This was like really the area in the draft where people were dying for tight ends to be relevant. Hayden Hurst, he was somebody who, in my eyes, was a complete bust. Yes, he stayed healthy for most of the season, but single-digit points in 66% of his games. He only had 5% of Joe Burrow's passing touchdowns, and he's a free agent again this offseason. So it'll be interesting to see where the Bengals sign him. If the Bengals do sign him, where do you think Hayden Hurst goes in drafts? Do you think that people are just going to be so attached to this offense being explosive that he'll get pushed up slightly to that kind of like round 11, round 12 zone? Or do you think he's going to be, people will take notice of the stats and he'll be around a similar position?
I think people will take notice of the stats. They're going to remember that he didn't help them last year. Hayden Hurst is one of those guys that's like, oh, he didn't help me, like, oh God, this felt bad. And I think he stays the same. Would I draft him? I probably would. If he stays on the team, go 2 years in a row, gets another year in the offense, another year of chemistry of Joe Burrow, you're just buying touchdowns. This is something I think we get lost with tight ends. We're always looking for I hope I can find the next Jordan Reed. Like this guy that was, I hope I can get 2014 Kelsey, right? Most of the times you're not getting Dalton Schultz again. It's going to be really tough to find these guys. So when at the end of these rounds, if you're not taking a tight end in the first 9 to 10 rounds, you're buying touchdowns. And I think Hayden Hurst is a touchdown buying guy. Joe Mixon saw a little regression this year. Tyler Boyd saw kind of regression this year. Even when other guys were injured, Tyler Boyd really didn't step up. Hayden Hurst is having a decent, playoff set-off games this year. So I think we start to take note of that. If he gets a minor spike, then this guy becomes relevant for you in best ball in a three
Yeah.
tight end build. Even though I've seen people do 4 tight end builds. Like I think Hayden Hurst has his value in fantasy, and I think this ADP, if it stays the same, it's a perfect time to try to draft him again. I'm hoping he goes a little bit later, but it wouldn't surprise me if he went up a little bit. If he goes a little bit, I would probably dodge him, but at this point, he's a perfect ADP.
Yeah, and I think, the Bengals can move on from Joe Mixon and Tyler Boyd with little to no cap hits. So if they do decide to overhaul things a little bit to try and pay T. Higgins and be able to pay Joe Burrow like a market resetting contract, then perhaps I'd have more interest in him. A tight end who definitely surpassed expectations was Evan Ingram. Tight end 9 overall, the 4th most yards at the position, 4 top 5 weekly finishes, and 17% target share. That spell where everything just seemed to click for him was brilliant. And I look back now because I was very in on the Jaguars as a whole. I had plenty of Zay Jones, I had plenty of Trevor Lawrence and Christian Kirk, but I didn't have a huge amount of Evan Ingram. And looking back now, I'm cursing myself because it just seems so obvious that the time in New York was marred by poor play calling and issues like that and injuries. And outside of his rookie year, things just never really seemed to be a good situation. Do you think we should have maybe bought in a little bit more coming into this year?
Definitely. I think his ADP was a little too low. I bought a lot of Evan Ingram because he was on the cheaper side, as we like to call it, right? He's athletically been a beast. It kind of has some stone hand moments at times, but athletics was there. They paid him a lot of money to come in for 1 year. You have probably one of the best quarterback prospects to come in. If it wasn't for, let's say, Joe Burrow, it would probably be the best one since Andrew Luck kind of situation. This guy's, Trevor Lawrence had a great year last year, whether people want to admit it or not. He just had the worst receiving core of all time. So I look at Evan Ingram and I look at Zay Jones. I look at Christian Kirk and I go, man, you have a great quarterback. You actually might have a shot. And to be fair, I'm also just not the biggest Giants fan. I've never thought they were a good organization. I actually know one of my acquaintances here is a former Giants player, and he tells me it was like the worst organization he's ever been a part of. I'll put it this way: he was on the same team with Eli Apple when he was there, and he was like, "Man, it sucks to be there." And it says a lot to me that he would say that. And so anyone that leaves there, I think has a chance to do better because it has historically in the last few years, it just wasn't a good organization. Now it's better this time around, as Brian Ball and whatnot. But up until that point, Evan Ingram left. He know that he had a chance. He still, even on his bad years, was still an overall relevant player in the NFL. So it doesn't surprise me he did as well as he did. And also I believe a lot of it came down with Trevor Lawrence just being as good as he was. And a change of scenery is huge. I think anybody can relate to that.
Yeah, definitely. Tyler Higbee didn't have a change of scenery, but he did have different quarterbacks at various points throughout the season. 6.9 points per game, and I think he's somebody that if you told a lot of fantasy players that Tyler Higbee finished as a tight end 9, they'd probably be a little bit surprised. But he hit 7 top 12 weeks, and at a position where we're really looking for any kind of consistency or anything like that, Tyler Higbee is never going to win you a week. He's never going to go 8 for 102 touchdowns. But if you can put up sort of 10, 12 points a week, that's not bad. I mean, obviously, it's some duds which dragged his average down. He had 3 touchdowns on the season, so it's easy to imagine that if Matthew Stafford had been healthy, that it could have been a better season for Higbee.
The funniest thing about Tyler Higbee is knowing that he had 7 games with 8 or more targets. 7. And he almost has more of those games than he has games with less of them. If you go from at least 7 targets or more, he's 50% flat. And it's which is crazy. So from a tight end standpoint, I'm not a Higbee guy, but next year I will be because he's probably the only person on this team that's left. And if you hold tight end to the same level as receiver, normal flex, or running back, Higbee comes off as a disappointment. But from a target standpoint, you want him, right? Your tight ends on average, if they can average you 8 points per week in half PPR, that's great. And I think Tyler Higbee's one of those guys that can do that. He can get you, 60 yards on 4 catches or 45 yards on 6 catches, whatever the number you want to throw in there. He's perfect for that. You're not getting zeros. And those numbers, those 7 points a week at the tight end position, add up to about 100 points at the end of the year. So I don't discount it. I know I was making fun of the Jarvis Landry line because it's a flex wide receiver, but from Higbee's standpoint, this guy is got. He should be your tight end two from now on when you're drafting him. You should just be taking him as a tight end two and going with it. I think he had a great year. The stat lines didn't show up, but they had four quarterback changes. That whole team was in disarray. That O-line was bad. But one thing that stayed consistent, everybody that was on that team threw to Tyler Higbee. You know, Sean McVay made schemes where Tyler Higbee was the guy that, hey man, worst case scenario, man, throw it to Tyler. He'll always be there for you. You know, and that's great. You know, he didn't get the touchdowns, but he's also a huge guy. He's 6'6". He could get you 6 touchdowns eventually. So he gets 3 more touchdowns. Then he becomes way more fantasy relevant for you than most tight ends would. I look at guys like Robert Tonyan and the rest of them. None of those guys had consistently 9 to 8 targets a week. So
yeah, definitely.
He disappointed, sure, but I think that's just because of the Rams as a whole. But if you look at objective possibility of being used, I think Tyler Higbee was a steal, an amazing steal.